is Dr. Spencer Plumb. We're going to switch gears a little bit. Spencer is a social scientist specializing in forest and water policy. He is currently at the Southern Rockies. He is currently the Southern Rockies Program Associate at the National Forest Foundation, working out of Flagstaff, Arizona. Thank you.
Thanks. So, Crystal, thanks for the great talk. While I was watching that, I realized that I did my postdoc right next to Ariane Medins, who is also on that research, and so I heard a lot about refugia in the past, and just by being in the same room as that. So that sort of brings to mind that this is a really great community, and I think we're going to have a lot of, our paths are going to cross a lot in the future. So it's great to be able to share some ideas with you now and know that I'll probably see a lot of these faces again. And it's really nice to have that and to continue to learn from this group of folks. So just wanted to acknowledge that first. So what I'm going to talk to you today about is my work at the National Forest Foundation. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the role that the National Forest Foundation takes in partnerships with the Forest Service specifically, how we bring in other partners to that relationship, and a little bit about collaboration and kind of where I see collaboration going with the Forest Service. And obviously this relates to other land managers as well, but in the role of Southern Rockies Program Associate at the National Forest Foundation, I work a lot with Region 3 of the Forest Service, so the Coconino National Forest, the Kaibab, the Prescott, and the Tonto National Forest. So that's where a lot of these photos you're going to see in the slides are from. And I'll just, first I want to talk a little bit about what the National Forest Foundation is. So it was chartered in the early 1990s as basically the nonprofit partner for the Forest Service. And it came, its mission is to engage Americans in community-based restoration and enjoyment of public lands. So we really do try and reach out to the public. We have a lot of communications, a lot of press releases, a lot of media that goes out to the public and talks about national forest lands, tries to encourage people to get out and recreate on them, and also recognize them for other values. We've been working with the Forest Service for more than 20 years now, and I think it's in order to kind of understand the context of the role that we can play, it's important to go back in time a little bit and understand the Forest Service as this evolving institution. So where did it start? Where has it been? And where are we going a little bit? So if we think about the Forest Service as this institution that started more than 100 years ago, its primary drive was to preserve forests for logging and also for watershed health. There was a need that was recognized that the cities downstream their water supplies were really dependent on these healthy forests above them. Then the Forest Service moved into sort of another mode, which was natural resource protection, and that also meant a lot of natural resource extraction. And there were definitely positive things that came out of this, but we're also seeing some of the legacy effects of those decisions. And now we're evolving into this more integrative and collaborative approach to natural resource management. We're bringing a lot more people to the table. And I think this last image is really indicative of that. If you look up collaboration Forest Service on the internet, you get tons of pictures like this of field trips, of people from the Forest Service talking to large audiences of people pointing out things that they think about when they think of natural resources. So we're getting into this place now where we're being more inclusive of the public. We're taking more opinions into consideration. And while that's often looked at as a really positive thing, it certainly has its challenges. It's not without quite a bit of difficulty that now decisions have to be made, and sometimes that is difficult for those people at the table to swallow, and sometimes it's agreed upon by everybody. But we're in this new place, and the National Forest Foundation is trying to also figure out its role in this new place. And over the past 20 years, I think we've been adapting to that, and we're pretty agile. So we're about 28 people in the organization, and we're growing to meet some of that capacity. So in order to gear this talk towards what's working and what's not working, I think we should start with sort of a synthesis of maybe what's not working so well. And if we start with a little bit building off what Crystal was talking about, where we have these large landscapes, we're trying to apply fire to them, we're trying to do restoration, and sometimes it just feels like a drop in the bucket. And we don't always have the resources we need to do the restoration work at a scale that is meaningful. On top of that, we also have a lot of layered interests here. So in this photo, this is a picture of the Cregan Reservoir on the Mogollon Rim in northern Arizona on the Coconino National Forest. And this reservoir is a water supply for Phoenix. It's also a really popular recreational area for folks just locally. You can see a marina here. There's also lots of Forest Service roads that people recreate on, camp on. And then you can also see how dense these forests are. So just in this photo alone, we can kind of get a sense of many interests involved in this project. And then we also see how dense some of these forests are. And if a fire comes through here, this watershed is going to be really in a world of hurt, right? We're gonna have a lot of ash and debris coming in, filling in this reservoir, and that's gonna cost the people downstream a lot of money, and it's also gonna cost the people that live in this area, it could impact their livelihoods and impact their lives directly. So a lot at stake on these landscapes, a lot of landscape to cover, and a lot of interests to take into consideration. We're also seeing more diverse users. So in addition to these sort of traditional interests, we're seeing places like Sedona get a ton of people coming to visit, and there are issues with how we manage all of those visitors. And so the National Forest Foundation is always looking for ways to work with these groups, to engage these new users, but also to work with the Forest Service to say, all right, what issues come up with these new users that are recreating on our forests? I think that in the 1990s, Sedona had about 200,000 visitors a year. Now it's over 2 million visitors a year. And so that 10-time increase in visitors is certainly having an impact. And then, again, matching these scales of restoration to the scale of the problem. As Crystal was talking about, a prescribed fire, maybe 600 acres. We've been working on projects that are closer to 4,000 or 5,000 acres, and that's still just not large enough to really make the impacts in the amount of time that we want to in order to prevent some of these more catastrophic things from happening. And that includes fire, that includes drought, that includes invasive species, and all of these events that we sort of see as detrimental and destructive, they're taking away the resources that we need in order to do the type of restoration that will prevent them. So we have these events eating up the budgets for restoration. So let's talk about some of the positive things, and I'm going to steal an analogy because I think this audience can understand it. So let's consider the Forest Service like its logo here, a nice big tree. And if the Forest Service represents this large tree, then the National Forest Foundation could be considered its mycorrhizal partner. And we are providing new and additional resources otherwise unavailable to the tree. And we are not the only partner in doing this. There's lots of organizations that are coming up in this same space of reaching out to areas that tree can't get to, and whether that's nutrients or water, or in this case, funds and new partners, there's a whole ecosystem of these smaller organizations that are finding ways to directly work with the Forest Service. And so by creating these mycorrhizal relationships, we're more flexible. We have we add capacity to the tree, to the Forest Service itself, and we also, we get the fruits of our labor here, hopefully as restoration. So the National Forest Foundation, we work across all 10 regions of the Forest Service. As you can see, most of our work, these stars are what the National Forest Foundation calls treasured landscapes. And these are areas mostly in the West, but across the US, that where we try and focus resources. So rather than doing these random acts of conservation, we try and focus them on specific areas that we see the need for lots of restoration work happening. And as you can see, Northern Arizona is one of those. We'll also talk a little bit about Colorado and some of the work going on the West Coast as well. But this is sort of how we organize ourselves, and we have field offices in these different locations in order to kind of work on these projects more specifically and provide the resources to these projects. So in inviting new partners to restoration, we're really making a concerted effort to get out there and talk to those new user groups, but also talk to groups that might not think of themselves as dependent upon the Forest Service. So one of the groups that we've really started focusing on are the municipalities and cities down in the Phoenix Valley. And so you wouldn't think of them, especially the governing bodies, as really caring about what happens 150 miles north of them, until they start connecting the dots that their water comes from the forests that are up on the Mogollon Rim, up in the Coconino National Forest, and that if those forests burn, their water supplies are going to be impacted. So we're reaching out into those cities, we're reaching out to those partners and saying, and making this pitch, making this case that they have a vested interest, and inviting them to participate. Sometimes that's financially, sometimes that's through a volunteer trip, and oftentimes it's a staged approach. So we'll start with a volunteer trip, we'll get them financially invested, and then they're gung-ho, they're out on site visits, they want to know when the next site visit is going to happen. And I think this picture really captures that. So in this picture we have City of Phoenix, City of Scottsdale, folks from CenturyLink, folks from the Pink Jeep Tours Company, and we were celebrating one of the projects that we finished this year, which was a watershed restoration project on Schnebly Hill Road, which is near Sedona. And this project covered 11 miles of road and was intended to reduce erosion by adding additional drainage to the road. In total, it was a $250,000 project, and we finished it just this last July. And all of these partners were a big help in getting that done. Some of that was logistics. By working with CenturyLink, we had to work with them directly in order to not cut a critical internet conduit line that ran up and down the road. And then from other partners, we had financial backing. And then obviously the Forest Service was there the whole time and really taking charge of this project, making sure that it was doing what it needed to do. So in addition to adding partners, we're also focused on building sustainable programs. We often see programs that crop up, and then in a year or two they disappear. So as an organization, we're focusing on how do we build these programs so that they last 5, 10, 15, 20 years and continue to do this work, build a sustainable foundation of funding, and then provide a reliable source of resources for restoration. So the programs that I'm going to talk briefly about are the Northern Arizona Forest Fund, a campaign in Colorado called Find Your 14ers, a matching and awards program, and some of our collaborative resources that we offer through the Missoula office of National Forest Foundation, and then communications and marketing. And I'll just call attention to this real quick. I'm going to be outside with some of our materials after this talk, and I'd be happy to provide those to you, and you can kind of take a look and see what we're able to do, how we're able to highlight the work that we're doing. And I also have tons of stickers, so that's a big thing that we're producing these days. So the Northern Arizona Forest Fund, this is a 3-year-old program, and we're operating this out of Flagstaff basically, but we work across 5 national forests in Northern Arizona, and we're doing projects in all 5 of those forests every year. So to date, I believe we've burned more than 15,000 acres in prescribed burns. We've treated some 600 acres with hand thinning and mechanical thinning treatments. We've done 50 miles of road restoration for watershed benefits. So it's really focused on this watershed benefit, but under that umbrella, we're able to do a lot of different things. And the way that we get funding for this is that we go, again, to those folks in Phoenix and pitch these projects as important for your watershed. And if we can bring them up and show them how those projects are being done, that really clicks, and they're supportive of that. Then we work with the Forest Service to say, okay, what projects are most important? What are going to make the biggest impact to improving the health of this watershed for you guys? And they'll give us that list of projects, and then we can vet that with a group of advisors and say, okay, these are the best projects. We're going to do these this year, and then we can give feedback to the Forest Service about projects for next year and invite them to bring those additional projects that aren't funded to bring them back. So we've been able to do quite a bit. We're in our 3rd year, and we're looking great for our 4th year. We're going to have 8 projects next year, and so we're just building and building on this success. The Find Your 14ers campaign is really focused on trail restoration in Colorado. So Colorado hosts some 52 peaks that are over 14,000 feet, and this has become a real popular hiking project for a lot of people, is to hike all of the major 14ers, or any 14er that's close to Denver. If you go up there on the weekends, those places are slammed. But the Forest Service simply doesn't have the resources to take care of those trails in a way that allows them to be continually used the way that they are right now. And so what the Find Your 14ers campaign does is, again, kind of creates this umbrella where National Forest Foundation is out there looking for larger donations to do landscape scale projects, and then working with smaller organizations like the Colorado 14ers Initiative, Rocky Mountain Field Institute, and Colorado Mountain Club to do the work on the ground. So we're filtering those funds to these smaller entities that are locally based, and they're able to do the restoration work and the trail work at a larger scale, because we're there helping sort of push that funding mechanism for them. It is also focused on engaging people from sort of the Front Range and getting them involved when they go out to these 14ers, that there's some recognition of, we need to take care of these trails. The Matching and Awards program is one of NFF's longest running programs. And so this is a program that really focuses on getting some of the funds that we're able to raise as an organization back out across the country to smaller organizations. And so we solicit proposals for projects, and then we're able to give out grants to those projects. I think in 2016, we were able to give out $5 million in matching and awards grants, and that was some 167 grant applications for that. So it's a growing program as well. It also, I think, demonstrates the level of success that we can achieve with these programs. The Tahoe West Restoration Partnership is taking place over in California and is really a collaborative process led by the National Forest Foundation. And so we're bringing a whole group of stakeholders that are invested in the restoration of the western forests of the Tahoe Lake area and getting them to the table to talk about ways forward with restoration. And the last piece I would like to just talk a little bit about are sort of the innovative solutions that National Forest Foundation is working on. So in the last 3 or 4 years, there's been a push to develop some new programs and be innovative about how we're doing restoration in order to scale up. So one of those is creating a mechanism for creating wetland credits from wetland restoration on Forest Service lands. And that's taking place in Colorado right now. It hasn't been implemented yet, but basically it's creating a fund that can use wetland credits to perform restoration on Forest Service lands. Another project is a carbon offset methodology where we're looking at the net carbon balance of restoration efforts and saying, if we do restoration, are we able to retain more carbon on a landscape in living trees by keeping some of those trees alive than if those forests were to burn in a high severity way? And so if we're able to get that methodology passed, that may become a new funding mechanism for some of this restoration work. There are other mechanisms that we're exploring in terms of financing and for restoration, and I'd be happy to talk more about those after the presentation. So lastly, I think I'll just briefly talk about the co-benefits of collaboration. So we're playing this role of the fungi. We're in the dirt, we're out there trying to reach out to other people, and hopefully we're bringing those people closer and those groups closer to the Forest Service so that we can do the restoration work that's really needed. And I think that restoration is now sort of inseparable from collaboration, and I think that's an important way to think about it, in that we're going to need as many resources as we can get in order to do this at a scale that it really demands. And in order to do that, we're here to help, and I think a lot of the other organizations that are here presenting today and tomorrow are also playing that role. So I think it's an exciting time for us. Thanks.
We have about 7 minutes for questions.
Yeah.
So can you talk about your specific role in that Northern Arizona project you mentioned? I noticed you're using the term we when you're talking about the using the applied. How much is the National Forest Foundation sort of actively getting involved in some of the kind of detailed planning, implementation, et cetera, versus just sort of getting funding from the organization?
Yeah, good question. So the question was, how involved is the National Forest Foundation in some of these projects, and especially in Northern Arizona? So I use we in that case because we are involved in almost every step of the way, other than the project proposal itself. So once the project gets brought to us, we're reviewing it with the Forest Service, and I have a colleague that I work with, Rebecca Davidson, and she and I look at the projects. We talk about which ones we think are appealing for watershed benefits, and then we go back and we talk with the Forest Service about the details of that project. We make sure that all the NEPA clearances are done. We make sure that the project can be implemented in about a year. And then once implementation starts, I'm on the ground with those, with a contractor in a lot of the cases. So I'll be there, overseeing the work, basically serving as the contracting officer for the Forest Service. And the Forest Service is out there as well, looking at the work, making sure that it's up to the specs that they have written. So it is a very collaborative process in that way. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't want to emphasize a negative aspect, but do you ever, does the NFF ever serve as sort of the mediator of conflicts if there's disputes between partners and Forest Service and collaborative settings?
So the question is, do we ever serve as a mediator in conflicts? And I haven't seen that role come up, but I think that anytime you're working in those collaborative groups, there's going to be tensions. And so I think our job is to listen to all sides and to play the neutral role and say, these are the concerns that are being raised, and this is how they're being addressed, or and just be that neutral party that serves that sort of interface feature. Yeah. Yes.
I noticed on your map you had a star over our area, Salt Lake City area. Can you talk about programs in this neighborhood?
Yeah. So the work that we're doing here is in conjunction with some of the ski resorts. So we're able to get some funding from ski areas, and that's been a program that we developed in Colorado called the Ski Conservation Fund. And we're trying to apply that model in the Salt Lake area. One of the projects that we're working on through that is, I believe, the Mill Creek project, and so that's watershed restoration, really focused on, I think, bull trout species in the drainage, and adding in some culverts. I know that that's a project that we're really trying to get off the ground. A lot of the times, these treasured landscapes, they start with 1 or 2 projects, and then over 5 years, we're up to 10 projects in the area. So it is one of the newer focus areas that we have. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
So it sounds like you do a lot of connecting people and kind of facilitating funding for projects. And I'm wondering if your organization does much education, connecting people with education resources.
Yeah, so the question is, how much do we do with education and connecting people with resources? So that's a great question. We actually have a program called Conservation Connect, and that's really the focus of Conservation Connect, where we host a lot of online meetings, and we'll host webinars about specific topics that the Forest Service either has, people have come to them with these issues and want to know more about, like, the financing mechanisms. They're going to host a webinar about that folks can attend and say, I want to learn more about how conservation finance works. And so we host a variety of those every year. And so that's one way that we reach out and educate. We don't have an education-specific program. I think part of that is because there's a lot of folks out there already doing that educational work, and we do try and support those types of organizations. So in sort of more a second-hand way. Yeah.
You stated early on that your mission is to support the national forest system. Obviously, your name suggests that, but then you just previously stated that you were a neutral party in these collaborative efforts. So it seems to me that perhaps there's a built-in bias there that when push comes to shove, if there's a collaborative group, that you may favor the agency perspective over other perspectives. Tell me how you kind of handle that if you're playing your role facilitator.
Yeah. So we are certainly, we try and work closely with the Forest Service, but we also try and keep our independence by by operating really transparently. In meetings, we establish that we're the ones hosting the meeting, that the Forest Service is often cannot host the meeting for some, there are often reasons that I forget the, yeah, the FACA conflicts. And so we're the ones hosting them on their behalf. We're definitely giving the Forest Service some flexibility. And I think that, our role is not to say that, is not to side with the Forest Service, but to say, how do we get everybody here to be able to work within the confines of what the Forest Service is trying to achieve. I don't know that is always the case, but it's a sticky spot to be in sometimes, yeah.